everyone. Welcome to Miller's Military Moments, where Master Sergeant Jason Miller, hey, that's me, is going to share parts of his 20-year Army career. Moments from the U.S. to Kuwait, Iraq, Egypt, and Afghanistan. Weekly episodes will be posted on my website at millersmilitaryMoments.com. So bookmark that site and stay tuned. Recording. Welcome to Miller's Military Moments, where today I am your host, Master Sergeant Miller. We have an incredible guest that I'm excited to have on the show. He is an accomplished Broadway actor, playwright, and has been recognized for being an incredible voice for veterans while sharing the challenges that many of us go through in his body of work. So today we get the opportunity to hear about his projects, The American Soldier and Landing Home, how they came about, what inspired him to do them, what he has learned about veterans and our challenges, and what he wants the world to know about veterans, and of course, where you can go to view his projects. So welcome, Douglas, and thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, when you first contacted me, I was shocked. Being a new podcast and not sure, how much of my story was out there or resonating with others. But when we talked on the phone that day and discovered, how we both shared the same desire to tell the story of American service members, I knew right away. I was like, I want to bring you on the show and have you share your story and thoughts, some of your experience with veterans. So this is really a great opportunity, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem. I'm grateful that I came across your profile.
Yeah, absolutely. I think LinkedIn, right? You found me on LinkedIn?
Yeah. I'm connected with a lot of different veteran organizations and veterans specifically, and so now my paths cross with different people, and I believe you either shared or commented or liked a post that I had done the same, and then I, I saw that you were a podcaster, so that's when I reached out because for me, I love sharing what I do about veterans and the message of the play with people who have podcasts. It kind of, and it's my way of grassroots or guerrilla warfare for press. You know how I get out there and how I try to share the message for the play.
Absolutely. No, that's really cool because that's a great part of the story too. Because LinkedIn is such a powerful tool, and I'll tell you. So being in the Army, we've done a lot better with how to help service members transition from the service to the civilian sector.
Yeah.
But we still got a lot of work to do, to be honest. But LinkedIn is one of the most powerful tools that is still underutilized in the military sector. And we're trying to do better with just getting people on it earlier rather than like right when they get out. Hey, I need a job, and that just doesn't work. I mean,
That kind of goes to the technology part, right? A lot of vets not using technology or connecting in a
yes. Absolutely. So using the technology, the social media, and then that networking, that, putting yourself out there a little bit, networking. And it's very interesting because I network in my job every day.
yeah.
I talk to so many people at my job every day. I talk to high level people. I talk to junior people. So it's interesting when it does come to stuff like that, how some veterans will be like, no, I'm not putting myself out there. So, and we've just got to do a better job of getting them out there and feeling comfortable with doing that networking and talking to people, and because they want to meet us, they want to hear our stories. You're one of them. And it's really great how it still intersects on that LinkedIn algorithm, so to speak, that you can come across different people. So that's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah, it's just getting guys to be more vulnerable, and that's always the challenge, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you definitely you nailed that one. It's that vulnerability. Do we want to put that vulnerability out there? Do we want to admit that we don't know things?
Yeah.
We've been really good at something for 20 years or more,
Right.
and now we've got to kind of start at the ground up, and we've got to say, hey, well, these are my skills, and I want to come do those things, but what else do I not know? And then, being vulnerable to that type of thing, it's tough. You're right.
No, it's always a challenge. I mean, you're conditioned for how I don't know how many years you're 20 years or more
Yeah,
you're
I'm
in
at
the
20.
military to not be vulnerable, to be a soldier, and so vulnerability doesn't really work well when you're trying to create soldiers. Uh,
Right.
so it's they kind of condition that out of you, and it's conditioned by your peers, and then when you need it back in when you're trying to transition back into normal society, it's a I guess it's an emotion or it's a trait that is like it's been buried for so long that it's hard to pull back out.
It is. You're right. And I think, so one of the things we tried is to get us to get started with the networking and LinkedIn earlier, within a couple years of us retiring or getting out, um, to give us enough time to work through those things,
Yeah,
because just like you said, it's tough. We've been conditioned a certain way, and so hopefully we're making strides. And I think a lot of it, that'll where it'll help is so people just like me goes back into my unit that I'm in for a little bit longer, and I share, some of the stuff that I've learned and that I know from going into LinkedIn and some of the other resources I've used, so that they may feel a little bit more comfortable. Because the interesting thing is look, everybody in the Army right now, none of us have gotten out before.
right. Yeah,
So it's hard to go to your peer next to you and be like, "Hey, man, how do you get out? How do you network? How do you go find a job?" And they're like, "I don't know, Bob. Um, I've been doing the same thing you have." So
yeah.
it's
It's a shame that the military doesn't I don't know like have a LinkedIn course, or a course. Yeah, I mean a social media course or a LinkedIn course to help guys transition out. But again, that goes to a bigger issue with the military actually preparing our servicemen and women to come.
yeah, no, I agree. So we have the transition assistance program, and again, yes, we that could be a whole nother show we could talk about, and I probably will one day. But um, yeah, the LinkedIn, it's barely mentioned in that transition assistance program, and it's too late when you take that course. It's kind of, I'm not saying too late, but I mean it's too close to when you're getting out.
Right.
And it's not in detailed. It's not really good enough of what you need. There's other resources out there that could really help us 2 to 3 years out. So, but you're absolutely right. We as a service need to get better, and really start preparing somebody not to get out, but from day one. I mean, but it's tough, like you said earlier, because we're trying to condition us to be war fighters,
Hmm.
which need certain characteristics and emotions or lack thereof in certain areas. So it's another challenge to allow us to still be ourselves and certain things. So I get it. It's tough, but yeah, that definitely will be a show for another time. So, but the power of LinkedIn, there you go. So let's talk about your play, The American Soldier. And I think there's, a big group of people that really haven't heard of it. And I think this is a great story. And, so how did it come about? What inspired you to do it and stuff like that?
Well, it came about. It. I started kind of getting the idea. I'd say every year I, I lose track of when I started doing it because it gets a year later. But
Right.
I believe it was like around 2007 or 2008. I I became very concerned or very um, I felt that something needed to be told about veterans who were coming back from the Middle East at that beginning. At that time, we were just really getting ramped up. You know, going into I believe that was the second Iraq, and we were already we were going into Afghanistan. We were already deep into Iraq. So the stories of PTSD was starting to come back. Were starting to be told of suicide and guys who were coming back who were struggling financially. And they were all in the newspapers. If you remember that day, the New
Hmm.
York Times used to do a big every Sunday. They would do a big story on a veteran story, and they would go in many different directions. But they would always have a story of a guy coming back with PTSD. So I started reading those stories, and I thought, wow, this is these guys are really suffering. It doesn't seem like anybody's trying to do anything to help them. And I mean, there was a couple particular stories that really moved me, and then the one story that really just kind of really pushed me over the edge was a story about a guy who came back. I believe it was in the Wall Street Journal, and he was struggling to pay his bills, so he was going house to house doing odd end jobs to make enough money to pay his bills. and I believe he just came back from Afghanistan. And I was really moved by it. And I thought, man, that is so unfair. That is just so wrong how we're sending these guys off and they're coming back and they're struggling and then they can't even pay their bills. So I I kind of started to dive into started going to the New York Public Library and I started saying, you know what, let me try to. And I should also back up is I became very patriotic. My parents were immigrants, and they were both very patriotic. My father was an Argentinian Jew, and he was always very grateful to the American servicemen who fought on beach on Normandy because of what they did to save his
Yeah.
people during the Second World War. So he was a very proud. He was the classic American immigrant of his generation. He was very proud of being an American. He passed away about 3 years ago, and
Mm.
he would just always say, you know, this is the greatest country in the world, and you know, the world is jealous of America, and if it wasn't for the Americans, you know, I mean, he always make jokes, you know, Europe would be eating. They'd be eating sausage and drinking beer and kraut all through all through France and Italy.
Right.
So he
Yeah.
kind of instilled patriotism, and I came out of the World Trade Towers in 2001. So if you remember back then, everyone was really patriotic, and we were getting the saber was being rattled to go to war, and so that DNA of mine from my dad of being patriotic was really turned on during during the years during 9/11, during the years after 9/11. So when the stories started to come back about guys who were struggling, I was really upset about it. I felt like it was wrong. So I said I'm gonna try. And I was always talking to people, and I was always with my daily interactions. I'd always tell, this is so wrong. You know, I don't know how come no one's really talking about this. You know, and so someone said, why don't you kind of do something about it, kind of create a play about it or something. So I said, yeah, you know, that's not a bad idea. So I used to go to the New York Public Library, and my goal originally was to tell the story of the American Revolution, how the American Revolution started, and remind everybody that, you know, the men who fought during the American Revolution is what made this country great, and so we should remember how great this country is because of servicemen, and we should take care of them. But
Yeah.
to me, I didn't realize that the same problems that we were dealing with after Iraq and Afghanistan, we were dealing with them in the revolution. And I started realizing, the more I started doing research, as I started digging down, this was a pattern that it was being repeated, conflict after conflict after conflict. And you know, I was how old am I? I don't want to say my age now, but I was much younger. So I was like, when I was going back, I was like, wow, I didn't have kids. I have two kids now. I didn't have any kids, and I was just newly married, and so I had a lot of energy to go back to the New York Public Library, and I would do that in between auditions. And I just started going down a rabbit hole about what what veterans had been going through from the Revolution, the Civil War, First World War, you know, stuff that I didn't even understand. You know, so a lot of themes started coming up. So I put all these letters together, and I had trouble finding a director, and no one knew what to do with it. And I wanted to tell this story, and so kind of fast forward to compress all the obstacles I had to go over to finally find a director who actually thought what I was doing was a good idea, because a lot of directors were like, I have no idea what to do with those letters. Like, that's what do you want to do with that? I go, I don't know. I'm hoping you're going to tell me. and um, and so I came across a director, and I performed one of the pieces. You know, my wife said, look, just hire somebody, do what you do best, memorize one of the pieces, create a character, do it for someone, and see if there's anything there. And if there's nothing there, to let it go. And I did it for this one guy. His name is Patrick Lillis. He's a very well known solo show artist director. He's really well known here in the off Broadway theater arena, and he's been inducted into the Indie Theater Hall of Fame. And so he had a really good handle how to grab this material and craft it. So I showed him one monologue, and he said, "Hey, that's really interesting. Where'd you get that?" So I shared him my story, and he said, "You have any more?" I said, "Yeah, I have plenty more." And I did another one, and then I did another one, and mind you, I had been paying him every time. So I was like, okay, you know, are you interested? You know, I like to turn this into a 20-minute play. I like to perform it, you know,
Right.
you know. And he said, yeah, you know, let's work together. Let's work. I can't remember, but I think it's let's work 4 weeks together. we'll find a festival and you'll do it and I'll be done with it. So we're I'm around 2014 right now, 2014, and
Hmm.
I've been working with them, and I've been bouncing around and kind of going through directors and going through workshops, trying to get something together. By 20 by the end of 2014, I had finally had a 20-minute version of a play, and he said, "Great, now go find a festival. Let's do it." And task completed. Basically, you've given your voice as an artist, and my mission has been complete. And as an actor and as a producer, once I get once I get locked in on something, it's hard for me to let go.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to get it done, to be honest with you, Jason, because I was just like, man, if I don't finish this project, I'm going to kill myself.
Right.
You know, so I couldn't even find a festival. No one wanted to hear plays about war. We were getting at that point we were getting a little saturated with what was going on in the Middle East, and people were getting.
Sure.
And I live in New York; it's very jaded here, and people were turning on what was going on in the Middle East. So the appetite for this subject matter wasn't there, and I couldn't even get accepted to a festival. But I had prepared and I was ready. So there was one festival. It was called the Bowery Poetry. It's called the Mono a Mono Festival. It was at the Bowery Poetry Club, very well known beat poetry little space that's been there since
Hmm.
the early 1950s. And they do a festival. And so she said, "Listen, I heard about your play. I had someone drop out. It's Memorial Weekend. You know, can you do it?" And she gave me I think she gave me a 2 week notice. And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Great. I'm going to pair you up with some other person." And I was little did I know I was paired up with a girl who's doing a play about being overweight and her father. Really nice actress, but I was like, wow, this is a weird pairing.
Right.
So I did the play, I performed it. I prepared it, got myself ready, and I finished it. And it was a rainy Memorial Weekend. It was the Sunday before Memorial Day. It was pouring down. I remember thinking I didn't even want to do the play anymore. I was because it was raining, and it was like 8 people. She says, there's not going to be many people there. And so, as an artist, when a producer tells you there's not going to be many people in the theater, you're already demotivated.
Sure.
You never want to do stuff for like nobody. And so I said, okay. And so I went, and there was only 8 people in the house on a rainy day, and 3 of them were mine, and 5 were hers. And one of them was my director out of my 3, and the other one was a photographer, and then it was me. And so I did the play, and it came off really well. And then a girl came up to me, and she said she was the sister of an Afghan soldier who had given his life, who had fallen. He had died in Afghanistan, and
Wow.
she was very emotional, and she said, "I really appreciate what you're doing, and I hope you don't stop because it's really important." And I got a standing ovation, and I tell this all the time. It wasn't the standing ovation wasn't that big of a deal, but it was how people reacted to the material that really touched me. And I felt that the play had a voice. Like it's hard to explain, but for the first time, I felt like the play was starting to talk back to me. Like it was starting to tell me something. And
Yeah.
so afterwards, my director was like, "Wow, that went off way better than I thought." And I go, "I know, that was crazy, wasn't it?" And he said, "You know what? I'm really interested in working on this. So why don't we flesh this thing out, and let's make it. Let's add some more pieces. Let's add some more balance. Let's really craft this thing out." So we said, "Let's do it. Let's go for it." So now I found my director. He had committed, and we got it up to about 45 minutes. We added some different characters, and we worked on it for like 5 weeks. We hired a set designer and a costume person and everything. We went all in. And he said, "Now we got to find a." I was going to do the New York Fringe Festival, which is a big festival here in New York,
Hmm.
and they had just canceled it because they were having some money problems, and it's a very big festival. And I was like, "Oh, you got to be kidding me! They just canceled it." Literally, when I put my application in, they sent an email out to everybody who applied and said, this was in 2015. They said, we're canceling the festival." And I was like, ah. So
Wow.
my wife is from Scotland, and she performed. I mean, I've performed in Scotland before at the Edinburgh Theatre Festival, Edinburgh Festival Fringe, which is a massive festival. There's like, when I did it in 2010, I did a play called True West. There was like 1,500 plays there. When I went in 2015, there was 3,500 plays, and
Wow.
it's a Super Bowl of theater festivals. A lot of Broadway shows and plays from the West End. They go to they go to Scotland. They do their play. They pick up the reviews and they come back. They use it as a trial run, right? Work out kinks, get reviews, get some press about it, and then come back. And they've got plays of all kinds, massive, big budget plays, small plays, and so let's just go to Scotland. Let's do it at the Festival Fringe. You know the Fringe. You've had success there. Let's do it there. We can, I get to see my mom. Two birds, one stone.
Yeah.
And I didn't even have at that time. I didn't even have a name for the play. I was like, what do I call it? I called it Brother Soldier, Men of Arms. I mean, I was all kinds of names. And she goes, just call it the American Soldier, because you have to have a name when you put the application in for the festival.
Right.
And I said, she goes, why don't you call it the American Soldier? And I said, okay, but that's kind of weird. I mean, I'm an American going to Scotland with a play called The American Soldier, and they're going to be like, I mean, who is this guy? So anyway, she goes, it is what it is. Just call it The American Soldier and just be done with it. It doesn't matter. So I called it The American Soldier. And right before I went to Scotland, I was invited to do a 2-night run at an off-Broadway theater here in Manhattan. It was a festival of plays. They were going to Scotland. And if you're going to Scotland and you're here in New York, they invited you to do a play there. And I said, cool. So I went there, and a reviewer saw my play, and she said, I saw your name, The American Soldier. I'm really interested what that play is about. I would like to review you if that's okay. And I said, oh, great. That's the last thing I want to review. And she worked at that time, she wrote for the Huffington Post. So anyway, she wrote a review. She loved it. She gave a glorious review. She was really moved. And so I was able to use that piece of review to go to Scotland. And that was kind of like my stepping stone, because now I had a piece of press that I didn't plan for. And when I got there, what started to happen was people were reacting to the play the same way they reacted to it on that rainy night back in the Lower East Side of Manhattan.
Wow.
What I didn't really realize then is that a lot of families who were families and young sons and daughters who were serving from Scotland and Ireland and in the UK were struggling with PTSD on a much heavier way than Americans were, because Brits don't really, they're more stiff upper lip. They don't like to talk about any of their problems.
Yeah.
So what I thought was going to be like an intrusion of an American bringing an American play they were taking me in with welcome arms, saying, thank you for telling this story. This story is a universal story. And after every time I would do the play, I would have a queue of people lining up in tears trying to thank me. So we went from like it was a 3-week run. It's only 3 weeks festival. We went first 4 days. I think we had like 6, 7 people. Then we started getting reviews. And then we were up to 10 or 15 people. And mind you, this is when you start getting 10 or 15 people at the Festival Fringe in Scotland, it's a big deal, because it's very typical for people to do their plays and have no one in the house, because there's so much competition. There's like,
Right.
the whole city shuts down for you to go see theater, basically. So we were getting 10, 15. We're like, this is great, Then
Yeah.
somebody from the Amnesty International organization saw the play, and she nominated me for an Amnesty International award. And the play blew up, basically. The play, once that got on the papers, we sold out the whole last week.
Amazing.
We had lines. And so after that press exploded, and exploded on Facebook and here, and everyone was like, what's this play? So all my friends who were in the theater across the country started booking me. And that's how the life of the play took off. I started touring it. And after every tour, I would do it, and someone would say, I've got to connect you with this organization of this person. And then they would connect me, and I would do the play. And that's how I got to the Kennedy Center. That's how I got to the Library of Congress. And that's basically been the journey of the play since that day, since that rainy day in 2014.
That's amazing.
Long story.
That is
Sorry about that.
An amazing story. And so, I mean, I have a uh, personal appreciation for you telling the story because I too suffer from PTSD. I think you heard on one of my previous episodes, and it's it's a tough thing to talk about, and
Yeah.
it's a tough thing to deal with, and so it's it is an amazing thing for you to share this story. So I want to go back to these letters that you discussed that kind of formed the basis of the play. What were these letters? Who were they from, and who were they to?
So they were a mixture. You know, they had changed over the years. A lot of the letters were letters that one that moved me personally, but so the revolution piece is from Joseph. Some of the letters are all from one soldier or from one family member,
Okay,
and some of the letters are kind of Frankenstein's in a way. They're put together.
sure,
Because as you know, as being in the military, when you write letters, you write about a lot of mundane stuff,
yeah,
and not necessarily stuff you can build a play about.
sure,
And so when you're reading letters, there's a lot of stuff that pattern was, which has also been really fascinating, was also true from the revolution. You'd be reading revolutionary letters and they'd be like, today I shot monkfish, and tomorrow we shoot monkfish. Looking forward to have monkfish.
right.
Monkfish getting, after a while you're just like, okay, monkfish, I got it.
Yeah, okay, I'm done. I've got monkfish. Yeah,
I got monkfish.
so interesting.
But
So were there letters then from multiple of several of the wars, whether it be Revolutionary, Civil
yeah,
One and Two? So you read and discovered several from all of those different eras.
yeah. So when I started working with my director, he said we got to find more balance because the play was very heavy with only men and only
Hmm.
revolutionary pieces. And he said, the play. This is in the beginning. This is even before before I did it for that rainy night. He said, the play. We have to have way more balance. This place,
Sure.
a whole lot of balance. So when I was going into the library, like I said, I started to research revolution, but I started, you know, once I picked up another, in there, when you go to the New York Public Library or any library and you look up um, uh, books that are contained with veteran letters, it's an endless supply. I mean,
Wow.
it's forever. It's forever. I mean, you can write a play on so many different things. When you research war, it's forever. It's like
Hmm.
researching humanity almost. So uh, I would research the revolution, and I found really interesting. I said, let me go try the Civil War, and that was really cool. And I said, let me try the Vietnam War, and I would start bouncing it around from different wars. And then I would basically what I would do is I would photocopy or I would write down the letters that I felt were really moving. And so for the revolution was Joseph Plum and Ebenezer Fox. They were
Hmm.
2 Minutemen, and they kept really detailed diaries, and that was really interesting. I mean, um, they were really educated, and they just kept really good diaries. So, and their diaries are well known. Everyone, I mean, there's tons of books on them, on Joseph Plum and Ebenezer Fox. And so I found some pieces in there that were really moving, and I said, okay, that's great. That's my revolutionary piece. And from the very beginning, I said, I am not going to do George Washington. I'm not going to do Abraham Lincoln. I'm not going to do any famous people.
Right.
It's my goal was to tell the story, the homage of what sacrifice really means at the infantry level. That was
Yeah.
always my goal. I said that's really what I'm interested in. And so when I went into the Civil War, now the one Civil War, I think he is probably the highest of class, class meaning rank. Um, it was Lieutenant Sullivan Ballou. He fought for the Northern Potomac for the Northern Army,
Hmm.
and he fought. He died in the Battle of Bull Run. It's a very well known letter. It was done when Trump was inaugurated. It's been done in Ken Burns' inauguration. But when I was doing the research and I came across that letter, I was like, okay, I know it's been done, but I like it and I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
So,
And so I mean, these people, you know, they, you found their stories, and it was, even though they were, either upper class, high ranking individuals, they still suffered from PTSD or challenges,
yeah,
after the conflict was over.
Yeah, yeah. Some of them, or some of them were like they lost their son to suicide, or they lost their son in Vietnam War in a helicopter crash. Um, um, one of them was, a wife talking about how hard it is for her husband to be deployed on multiple occasions,
Hmm.
and how she forgets sometimes when she's making dinner that her husband is leaving the next day. And then, as she says in her, in the character says in the piece, that, you try to hide all these emotions, you try to act everything is okay, even though you know that nothing is okay. um, and then the kid, letters about children saying, I don't like to see my dad leave, and he's the kid that I do, and he says, sometimes I try to think of a machine that I can hook up my dad to, that when he's asleep, so he never leaves again. So they were all pieces. They were struggling in some way, and what I tried to do with every character in the play, I play 14 characters, men, women, and children. What I wanted to do is I wanted to show how hard everyone was trying to get back home, either emotionally, physically, or spiritually in some way.
Yeah.
And that was the goal. And that was kind of the through line for the message of the play, that everyone is trying to get home in some way. And then I wanted, because the flip side of that for the audience is I wanted to see how much they're giving up for us not to be asked to leave home. So I wanted the reverse. I wanted the mirror basically to be shined on the audience, saying
Hmm.
that would be very hard for me to give up my home, to give up my family, to lose my family, to lose my son, to lose my father. And so I wanted, on the flip side of that, I wanted every character working so hard to get back home, which is, I'm sure you can relate to.
Yeah, I absolutely. So I'm definitely sitting here processing what you're saying, and one of the things that I can really relate to is the leaving. Um, so I went to on a combat deployment 4 times, and then I went to Egypt also for a year, which wasn't a combat deployment, but I was gone from my family for another year.
Yeah,
Um,
which is difficult.
and yeah, so the first deployment, my wife and my son was only 6 months old. My wife drove me to the drop off point and we said goodbye. And I will tell you, that is the one of the, I don't know, the roughest, the hardest, the worst things I've ever endured in my life is saying goodbye to my wife and 6 year old son. And
That
and
was,
of course at the
that was
time
the
we
first
don't.
time doing it.
What's that?
Was that the first time you did that?
Yes, that was the first time. So, and this was, we were invading Iraq in 2003. So we did not know how long we were going to be gone. We didn't know when we were coming home. We didn't know anything.
Right.
So it was just, you're going off into the dark, and you are just with your team and with your teammates and you're doing your job and you're going to, focus on that. And you're going to do absolutely what you just described. You're going to do whatever it is you have to do to get home. And we use, well, I mean, we definitely are mission focused, and it's a lot of the mission focus really comes to wanting to take care of our teammates and our family members that are over there with us right then and there, taking care of them because they're, our teammates, our friends, our family too, will help us all come home, right?
Right.
So we definitely focus on that. But you're absolutely correct, and we will do anything possible to get home. And when the subsequent deployments, I said goodbye at home with my family there, got in my vehicle, drove to the drop off point, parked, and myself and went and did my thing and got on our bus and stuff, left the key in my car or my truck. And a few days later, my wife would come and pick it up because that leaving was
Too
just
difficult.
gut wrenching.
Yeah. I mean, I, I, I can only imagine, and I've seen it. I saw it in the documentary with. I've read about it. Countless different variations of that. But when I first, what was one of the reasons why I was so moved by the documentary that I spoke to you about, that I saw on Netflix, Father Soldier Son.
Hmm.
They showed the deployment, and I mean, it broke me. I was just
Yeah.
like, I don't. God bless you guys. I mean, Jesus. It was,
Yeah,
I was it, brutal,
it
brutal.
is. It is brutal. My last one was in
And
16.
kids don't understand.
It, people, you said it. People just don't. Unless you experience it, you just don't understand. And my last deployment was 2016-17, and I was a first sergeant. And so I'm, in charge of a company, and I did my normal routine. I said goodbye at home. But so I have to be, there's a lot of family members and a lot of young kids and young soldiers there that are going on their first deployment. And I can see the tears and the emotions, and they're crying. And of course, that affects me.
Yeah.
And I know exactly what they're feeling. And
How
it's
old
like,
were
oh
you?
my God. So that deployment, I was 41.
Oh, you're a grandfather almost.
Right.
I know.
Yeah.
In all my research, a lot of those kids are going 21, 20,
Yes,
22.
absolutely.
You're like Grandpa Jason, Grandpa Miller.
Right. Absolutely. Um, and it's just tough when you're watching that and seeing that, and you're just kind of like, in a way, I'm kind of like, come on, time, let's go, hurry up, let's get on the bus and go, because it's just that emotions and
Yeah.
seeing what
I
everybody's
mean,
going through. It's tough.
and those were the emotions that I try to share in my play, and were the emotions that I felt weren't being talked about, and people were just, when we were getting heavy into the Middle East, I was just like, man, we're just treating this war. Because I remember the first Iraq war. I remember how big deal it was. CNN was coming to its life, and they were showing, you can, if you remember, the green tracers through the air.
Oh yeah.
And then it was like the whole world shut down. But by time we went through 9/11, we went through that huge ordeal as a nation, and we were pretty much burnt out. And by the time Iraq and all the mishaps that were being done with Iraq, people got so turned off that the news just really didn't cover it correctly anymore, and they were covering it it became, that was really the beginning of this political hyper insanity they were dealing with now. But everything became so political that you guys weren't being talked about at all. It all came down to what party was trying to score points. And when I was creating the play, I thought, man, no one's really talking about the sacrifice that these guys are going through. And why aren't we talking about the PTSD? Why are we talking about, why are these guys looking for money? I don't understand this. Like,
Right.
I'm not getting it. And the emotions of deployment. What was, you know, going to the home thing, what I found also really interesting, and I had to create that character, was what I noticed in my research, that home, because your desire to get back home is so deep, so big, so great, that home almost starts you start developing a new home when you're being deployed with your brothers or your sisters or your brother in arms. And then what I started realizing in studying with PTSD is that, especially the guys who are being doing multiple deployments, is 4, 5, 6 deployments, that they were confused of what home was anymore. Like, they didn't really understand. I want to be home, like back home with my family, but now I'm back home. I feel like I should be back home with my brothers fighting the war.
Yeah.
And that internal tear, that internal struggle, I found really fascinating and interesting. And I also found that was a big root problem with guys who were dealing with PTSD. You're sending them over there on multiple tours. They're developing this amazing, these incredibly tight bonds because they're experiencing life and death or dealing with it at all. Even if you're not even seeing combat, it's all around you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just ripped away from from your unit, and you're brought back home without any, I don't know, like a decompression, or without any, you know, uh, like they just, next day, you're one day you're in Iraq, and then 2 days later you could be driving your car going to Walmart, and
Absolutely.
and
Yeah. And
it's, that's a big drop off.
it is. And there was early on, it was exactly like that. And the Army tried to get a little bit better with um, integration back home, but it didn't, it never really met the intent that it should have. And a lot of times we were just kind of gearing back up to go again. And we never really either decompressed or, dealt with any of those issues. And we would just, they would pile on pile on and continue.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, it would just then there is that confusion of, well, am I home here with my family or am I home with my teammates in Iraq? And then sometimes we would come home and then we would move duty stations. Now I just left that whole team.
Right.
So now I'm with a different team. And then, there's struggles there with that. So I want to turn to something that you mentioned, talking about the the time period really in our country where the oversaturation of war, and it was hard to get people's attention. And really, so why do you think that was? And I think, in our earlier conversation last week, we kind of both talked about it. But yeah, why do you think that there was just so much oversaturation and they didn't really want to talk about it or hear about it anymore?
Well, I mean, I think 9/11 had a lot to do with it. I mean, I think that's one part of the problem. It was. I mean, we were so jacked up after 9/11. I mean, it was just if you. I mean, it just then you were dealing. Okay, are they going to bomb the tunnels? At least here in New York. I mean, are they going to
Hmm.
bomb the tunnels? You'd be on the subway reading the paper. They're thinking of doing an anthrax bomb in the subway system. Like great, and it was like continual for almost 5 years nonstop. It was just and I remember we saw guards at the subway stations for a long time in Manhattan, and so that was one part of it. And then I think it got to the point where I think you know and I've learned this over the years, talking to so many vets and being so immersed in this subject, with transitioning back home. But I think all humans at some point we just like we don't want to hear about darkness. You can only take so much of it, right? and
Right.
and then eventually you want to turn it off. And so that's another part of it. People are like, okay, I'm tired of the war. I know there's a war there, but I don't care. I just want to go to work and pay my bills. Right. I just want to get back to a level of normalcy. And I think that was another aspect. And then I think, politically, I think um, it became such a way for both parties to score points that it just became this, that's all you heard about politically. It just became such a political football that, and it's
Hmm.
always on the news channels, and it was just nonstop, right? I mean, I remember very clearly, I still remember, people throwing the shoe at Bush, and then everyone was looking for WMDs, and this war was, and then then this war was for naught, this war was a hoax, and then people were trying to defend the war, and then, it just became such a cacophony of noise that I think eventually people just said enough. I don't
Hmm.
want to hear it,
And
and
meanwhile, we forgot about the soldier that was fighting the war.
completely.
And
And I blame the media on that. I mean, I think the media should have made. They are supposed to be objective, and they're the ones they should have focused on what was important. They should have said, okay, that is going on, and that is a factor. But let's have a segment. Let's talk about the vets that are struggling with. Let's talk about the PTSD.
right.
Let's talk about the guys who are not being able to pay their bills. Let's shine a light on that. And I think that would have been a different way for us to stay connected with our military because uh, I was very concerned about it, and I was very moved by it, and I wanted to make sure that America understood this. But not everybody has the same passions that I do and the same empathy that I do, and so
Sure.
um, I think so. I think to answer your question, I think that was those three or four things all put together really is what did it, and I do blame, not to get political on this podcast, but I do blame, I blame our politicians, man, and it's become being in the Middle East has become such a way to score points for or
Sure.
against, you know,
Yeah.
and they don't ever stop, and
Right.
servicemen still get lost. We spend all this money building you guys up to go to war, and we spend pennies on bringing you guys back,
Hmm.
and and
That's a great perspective right there.
yeah, and it's frustrating to me, and it's frustrating. I think for me as an American, the son of immigrants who is very grateful, and the luckiest thing that ever happened to me is to be born in this country. And my parents instilled that to me, and I hope patriotism comes back, because I don't know how somehow that word has been hijacked and it's become a dirty word. But I I was I I care. It sounds cliche, but I really cared about the American story. Like it was really important to me. It still is
Yeah.
important to me.
Yeah, I mean, and I can hear that in your voice and in your story for sure, and I personally appreciate it. So a couple things in that general discussion, um, you know, so me as the American soldier, and when we talk about the politics of it, look, I just trust my politicians to send me where we're supposed to go,
Well, you're supposed
and
to. I mean, that's what you're conditioned
right.
to do.
Absolutely. So look, if you say I'm supposed to go to Iraq and I'm supposed to do these things, then and I thought we really learned from Vietnam that let's not blame the soldiers because they're just there doing the best they can, accomplishing the mission that the politicians told them to go accomplish. And so, right, I mean, hey, I joined the army because I've always wanted to serve our great country, and I do fall into that category of I'm willing to fight for those that can't fight for themselves.
Yeah.
So, I'm okay. And I understand that most of the time we'll be in a foreign country. But so what I'm also expecting then is for my politicians to not put me in harm's way unless it's really necessary. Um, that can be debated now. But so I definitely think, that definitely had a lot to do with it. How the focus was on the politics of it versus the young men and women that were still fighting it, and then trying to figure that piece out. And I think the big challenge we had then and we have now is not enough Americans have skin in the game.
Oh, you hit it on the head, man. I've used that phrase so much.
Yeah.
You hit.
So and and you and I did talked about this, and it's not that look, I don't not everybody has to serve in the military. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is everybody should have to provide some type of civil service to our nation.
Correct.
It could be teaching, it could be, firefighters, first responders, military. There's all kinds of ways. I'm not going to define that here, but provide some type of service, to our country because it is amazing and you have a lot of amazing opportunities.
Well, I will take it a step further from that. I mean, I believe that we're at a point now that, and I've brought this up before, and I believe we need a version of a draft. And I don't necessarily mean a military draft. And the problem with the moment you say draft, you get all these scars from Vietnam. They
Right.
coming up. But I mean, something, a version of what Israel, or a version of I think it's Switzerland who does it, where you turn 18, a you have to give service for a year or 2 years, and it could be the National Guard, or it
Hmm.
could be the Peace Corps for 1 year. I think it would do tremendous value in bonding our country, having each other understand each other, and then we would be more vested in understanding where we came from, right? Who we are as
Yeah.
a nation, and because I think with the rise of how the isolation is working with our phones and everything else and technology, I think just we're getting so fragmented now that we're all just basically retreating in echo chambers, and no one has any skin in the game. And that's just to kind of expand on that. No skin in the game. That was the difference between what's going on today and what was going on, let's say, in the First and Second World War, the two big major conflicts,
Yes.
or even Vietnam.
Absolutely.
It was more than 1%, and you always knew, at least, if you even go back to the Vietnam War, you knew somebody who was either being drafted, who was going to war, or you knew a neighbor or a cousin or a brother or a sister or friend. Someone was connected to the military, so you were vested on what was going on. And that was very true in the Second World War. I mean, the draft. I mean, we had a draft, and same thing in the First World War. And you know, I love cemeteries. It's one of my side things when I go traveling the world. I love, especially cemeteries where I see old veterans have been laid to rest. Uh,
Hmm.
and when we were in Scotland, we walked by a church, and it was an old cemetery, and my son picked it up and he said, "Dad, I think these guys were all soldiers." And we realized it was a small town. It's a small town in Scotland. It's right outside of Edinburgh, um, and they all fought in the First World War. And I thought it was the whole cemetery was almost either a son or a father who had died in the First World War. And I think, wow. Now, if that doesn't give you a perspective of what towns used to go through in many different conflicts, I mean, this is basically every male in this town. Basically, probably they gave their life um, during the First World War. So, just going back to how much skin in the game, or how less over the years the skin in the game has been just exponentially dropped down, where we have
Mm-hmm.
no one knows anything of what's going on in the military. And I think that's not a healthy thing for us as a nation. And I'm hoping some leader gets up there. I love for veterans to serve more in politics, because I'm a big fan of Dan Crenshaw and every veteran who's serving, because I think they have a vested interest to work together, because you have to in the military. You can't really
Yeah.
you basically you have one goal, and it doesn't matter if your religion, the color of your skin, where you come from, or how you speak. The main thing is, can you get the job done? And if you can't get the job done, you need to step aside so the next person can step up and get the job done. And
Yeah, I agree too. And I think, to just kind of finish up on the skin in the game comment, not that, look, I don't want riots and stuff going on like in Vietnam era, but, if more people were involved in, meaning were either in the military, had to deploy, all that kind of stuff, well, then more people would care.
yeah,
And then if they really didn't want us to be in Afghanistan or in Iraq or whatever the case is, then they would make a whole lot of noise. But what has really happened in this particular war the last 20 years is that if you haven't been directly impacted by it, then this nation hasn't asked you to sacrifice anything.
no, it's just it's a notification on your iPhone,
Right.
and
So,
that's been a really hard thing.
yeah. So, and then it just really goes, all this kind of ties back to you telling the story of the challenges that we've had of coming home and dealing with, coming from combat and our combat trauma, and then trying to find a job, and just trying to, sometimes just trying to make it, just trying to
Yeah.
get dressed every day, and so it's definitely, I mean, uh, an amazing thing for you to continue to tell that story. So is there a place that my listeners can go and watch the play?
They can't watch the play, but I mean, they can. I mean, they can definitely connect with me and find out when the play is going to happen, and they can read a lot of veteran letters that
Okay.
who have vets who have seen the play.
Okay. What's the best place to do that, to connect with you?
They can do that at www.theamericansoldiersoloshow.com,
Okay.
and
I'll,
and then
I'll
if
make sure I have this up on my website too.
yeah, and then the play inspired a TV series that I did, and it's on Amazon. It's called Landing Home, and it's also based on a lot of letters that I didn't use, that I from Iraq and Afghanistan, that I used to kind of comprise the script. And I just try to give, because when I would do the play, a lot of younger vets would say, "Man, I really appreciate you doing that." It's and they would pull me aside and they would tell me their struggles with getting work or not being able to transition back. And so I started collecting a lot of these stories. So um, I decided to say, well, let me try to tell a modern story of the American Revolution in a way. Let me try to tell
Hmm.
a story of a guy coming back from Afghanistan and not knowing how to adjust and get a job. And so
Yeah.
that's what I did, and that's called Landing Home, and you can find it on Amazon, or you can go to landinghomemovie.com.
Okay. I'll make sure, I'll get all those links on my website too.
Yeah,
And then, make sure the listeners can find those things. Cause I definitely want them to see that. And, something that I'm trying to present with my podcast through my story is, it's a soldier story. A lot of the stuff that I talk about, it's not just me. I mean, there's thousands of us out there that have gone through this, and just trying to continue to tell that story to the American people, just as you have done through the play and through your show Landing Home. And, there's so many amazing people. I mean, honestly, just that I have had the opportunity to serve with in the last 20 years. And America just needs to know about them.
Yeah,
And
I mean, like they do, and over the years, the play has started as a creative endeavor, has become a mission for me because I've become friends with a lot of vets um, who've lost Gold Star families, Blue Star families, people who've lost their brothers or their sons or fathers in combat, and what I've, as what they've shared with me after they've seen the play, they said, they've always told me this play for us is cathartic, and second, you've given us a voice. But what's been really important for me, which was my goal from the very beginning, and I'm so grateful that I was able to achieve it. The people who are not connected with the military see the play, and they're immediately they're just taken back, and they say, my uncle served, or my grandfather served, or I have my brother who's serving. I am going to go thank them for their service. Or next time, I never understood that about the military. That is something very powerful, and
yeah,
I've been being able to educate them. And just one last thing is the younger generations who have seen the play. I've performed it for universities, and what's been really great for me is to hear younger kids going, "Man, that is the best way to learn American history." And I said, and a lot of them,
yeah,
unfortunately, they're like, "I didn't even know we fought in that many wars," and you're just
yeah,
like, "Jesus, how?"
right.
But what's great is they're connected to it, and so I start leaving little kernels of the younger generation getting interested what the American story is, and hopefully they can pass it on. And then when they see a vet or they see a family member of a vet, they're willing to go up to them sincerely and genuinely and say thank you for your service. And then even more important is for people who are not connected to the military to really pay attention when we decide to go to war again. Uh,
Yes.
and
Yes.
what's been really cool about the play, and then as we both know, there's 16 veterans who are committing suicide a day. There's close to 4 active duty service members and guardsmen or reservists to take their lives. PTSD is around 20% for guys from Iraq and Afghanistan, and there's still a lot of guys from Vietnam that are still in dealing with it. And after every performance of my play, I've had guys from Vietnam stand up and share their stories. And I think a lot of them, because they're getting to this really golden year, they're getting in their 70s, and some of them are even in their 80s. That they're getting a little even more isolated. That their demons are starting to pop out.
Yeah.
And they've all said thank you. You're not forgetting us. And for any Vietnam guy who is listening to this podcast, I always say after every play, welcome home, because that's something a lot of those guys didn't get. And
Yeah. That's awesome.
so all these messages are really important for me, and I appreciate you letting me tell it, because this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to raise awareness, and I'm trying to spread the play, and hopefully more people will be interested to learn about it and to see it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I know for a fact there are a couple of Vietnam veterans that listen to the show, so they will be appreciative of that welcome home. And we do talk about that from time to time. So I think we'll kind of tie this up here, but we definitely need more of JFK's quote. Ask not what your country can do for you,
Yeah,
ask what you can do for your country.
for sure, for sure.
Definitely.
That should be, yeah. I mean, that's something that it's just not. It's we're getting so far from that
Yes.
getting so far from that quote, and
We are. So maybe we'll do another show at another time on that one.
yeah.
Um, so yeah. So Douglas, thanks again for coming on the show. I will make sure to get all of your links and stuff up on my website. And again, my website is millersmilitarymoments.com. So y'all can find all the information there. Appreciate you again, Douglas, taking the time to support our veterans and being a voice for all of us. It's really, really important for somebody else outside of our circle to speak for us sometimes. And you're one of those voices, and we just definitely appreciate it. So
Thank you.
thanks again. That concludes today's show. Have fun. Reach out if you can. Reach out if you need anything. Make your part of the world a better place. See ya.